Hello. Hi, guys. Welcome to the stream. Hey, Patrick. How's it going? I'm glad you could join. Hey, you and Tom. Oh, you have school early? All right. We'll have fun at school. Hey, Fluffy Buffy. What's up, Andro? This is Wuxia. That's right. Gonna be reading some Wuxia, a Wuxia story. Hey, Lyndon. You wonder how long this is? I don't know. This chapter is gonna be like, I'm gonna say an hour and a half. It seems to be a long chapter, yeah. Well, if you're just joining us, then well, we're in the middle of the story, right? We're in chapter 39, I think. No, yeah, 39. So, yeah, if you're just listening to the story, then you wouldn't know what's going on. Hey, Asian man, what's up, Dee Dee? Hey, Nikki, what's up, Lash? Glad you guys could join. How are you guys doing? All right, I got these to eat today. Check it out. Got shrimp chips, wasabi flavor. Yeah, they're called wheat puff snacks, I guess. Have you guys had these before? These are really good. Yeah, they come in different flavors. But this one is wasabi flavor. Let's see how it tastes. I don't think it's gonna be spicy, but we'll see. It's not that spicy. It has a little bit of that wasabi kick, but that's it. It goes away really quickly. All right, not bad, not bad. I don't know if I'll buy it again, but not bad. No, it's not that hot. But it does have that wasabi flavor. A little bit. Hey, Karina. Welcome. What is up, Earthbending Master? We have a master in the chat. Hey, Lee Rams. I'm gonna eat a little bit more before we get started. These are pretty good. Oh, I owe you a story about karaoke in Korea. Oh, okay. Thanks for reminding me. I do owe you guys a story. Oh, hey, Regine Leifer. It's late? Okay, well, have fun. Have fun going to sleep. Bye. What's up, Hope? Alright, so I do have a little bit of a story. It's not a big story. About karaoke in Korea. So I went to karaoke. I went to Korea one time. And so we were at this hotel and it was at night, right? And we wanted to go and do some karaoke because it seems fun, right? That's what you do in Korea. So, but we didn't know where to go, right? So it was four of us, including me, two guys and two girls, and then so we go up to the front desk of the hotel, and then we ask them, you know, hey, where are the karaoke places around here? So the guy at the front desk, he's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll tell you. He takes out this map, a map of the city or the neighborhood, and he starts going, well, you want to go to karaoke? You can go here, 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 here. And he literally circles like 12 places. in a fucking 3-block radius, a 3 or 4-block radius of karaoke places. There were so many karaoke places, and we're like, all right, cool, we'll just pick one, right? But we didn't know the Korean word for karaoke, right? So how are we gonna find it? So he writes us the word karaoke, and he's like, search for this word, just look for signs of this word. So we're like, okay, so there are these 4 tourists, and we're going out in the town at night, and we're looking for this place, and we're like, okay, is that karaoke? Is that karaoke? Is that karaoke? And we finally find a place, I think that matches the word. So we go into this building, right? And it's like a stairway. It's this tiny building, and the stairway, it's pretty dark. And then we walk up the stairway to like 6 or 7 floors, and we're like, are you sure this is the place? Like, I don't know if we went into the right place. So we're walking up, and then we see a door with a karaoke word on it. So we go in, and sure enough, it was a karaoke place. So like the signs were not lying. So we go in, and we ask the guy for a place, a booth, right? So it's one of those karaoke, like private karaoke places where you go into a room and then you sing. So we see this old Korean dude, and he looks at us, and we're like, can we get a room? But no one speaks Korean, by the way. So he's like, and this guy doesn't seem like he speaks Korean either, right? He looks at us and he's like, what does he say? What does he say? Oh, he goes, oh no, he goes, Korean only, right? So I walk up to him, and he's like, can I get a room? He goes, Korean only. And I'm like, okay, so I guess this place only has Korean songs, right? And none of us know Korean. And I go back to the group, and I'm like, hey guys, they don't have any English songs. They only have Korean songs. And one of the girls in the group, she's like, oh, no, I know some Korean songs. Let's do Korean songs. Let's have fun, all right? We'll just drink and we'll sing Korean songs. So I go back to the guy, the owner, and I'm like, oh, no, it's okay. We'll just give us a room. And he's like, no, Korean only. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, Korean only. And I'm like, oh, so you mean Korean people only, not Korean songs. He's like, Korean only. And he turns around and he just walks away. And I'm standing there, I'm like, what, really? And I walk back to the group, and I'm like, guys, they only allow Korean people in this place. And then we just have to walk out of there. I'm like, what the hell? It's a bit racist, right? I don't know. Maybe because he didn't want like to explain us. Like, you know, he probably gets a lot of tourists, and they don't want to explain how to work the karaoke machine or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, that was pretty bad. But luckily, we went out and we looked for another place, and we found another place, and they were much nicer in that place, right? They didn't tell us not to go away because we're not Korean. But yeah, and we found another place, and luckily that place had English songs as well as Korean songs, so we were able to do the karaoke that night. But yeah, that's my Korean karaoke story. He said it in English. I think those are the only English words he knows. Like, Korean only. You can't go. He's like this curmudgeon old Korean guy. But yeah. You have school tomorrow? All right. Are you guys ready? Let's do a recap of what happened last week, all right? Oh, let me burp. All right, last time a lot of shit happened. Last chapter. Uh, so our hero Ling Hu Chong, he goes and he agrees to fight this mystery person. Remember, he's in the residence of the four playfellows of Jianan, right? And remember, they tried to defeat him in sword fighting, and they couldn't do it. Right? They all lost, right? But the bet was that he has to defeat someone in this residence, and if he loses, then they get a bunch of treasures, right? So he has to give them a bunch of treasures. So he agrees to fight this mystery person, and the four playfellows, they take him to the secret chamber underground, and it had like heavy locked doors. They had to go through a bunch of locked doors, and it was a place under a lake, right? And it turns out it was a prison, right? So they were going underneath, and it was this super max prison. Okay, so they must have someone really powerful that they were keeping prisoner. So they go to this cell, and he finds out that the prisoner is this old man, okay? And he seems like a really powerful dude. He has a lot of martial arts power ability. And at first, the old man didn't want to fight, right? But after he talks to Ling Hu Chong, and he finds out that Feng Qingyang was the uncle master that taught. No wait, Feng Qingyang taught Ling Hu Chong his martial arts sword style, right? So turns out he has some respect for this Feng Qingyang guy, and then he changes his mind and he wants to fight, right? So the old man didn't like his four prison guards, but he was intrigued by Ling Hu Chong, right? So the four playfellows, they open the cell door and they let him in, then they close it, right? So it turns out they don't want anything to do with this guy. So they close the door, and our hero Ling Hu Chong is in here with this old man. And before the fight, Ling Hu Chong, remember, he was given this little piece of paper, this little note by Xiang Wenxian, right? Who's not here, who's above ground. So he was given this piece of paper to give to the old man. So he hands the little piece of paper to the old man before the fight, and he didn't read it yet. The old man opens it up and he reads it, and then they start to fight, right? So they fight. The old man turns out to be, he was really powerful, all right? And at first, Ling Hu Chong was having a bad time fighting him, but Ling Hu Chong is smart, right? So as he starts fighting him, he learns more and more about this sword style, about the Dugu 9 swords, right? He's smart, he's learning, and he gets better, right, as he's fighting. And the old man is surprised, like he's like, oh, why is this guy so good? He seems better than Feng Qingyang. But then in the middle of the fights, the old man lets out this loud roar, right? This huge roar, and it's probably uses a lot of energy, and Ling Hu Chong just falls unconscious because of this loud roar, right? And that's it. He falls unconscious, and that's where we left the last chapter. How's that? Boom, 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 boom. One of your favorite foods is udon. Do you like udon noodles or ramen noodles? Udon noodles is too thick for me. I think I like the ramen noodles, the normal ramen noodles. You got pizza today? All right. What kind of pizza do you have? You like soba? Really? I don't know. Among the three major noodles in Japan, I like the ramen noodles the best. Udon. Isn't udon big? It's a little bit too thick for me. Ramen noodle is just the right size, the right thickness. I love it. All right. Oh, pho is excellent. That's my favorite food actually. Oh, pho. So last night I was at my parents' place and my mom made pho. It was so good. It was so good. Yeah. The thing with homemade pho is that my mom gives me a lot of food. You know, you go to a pho restaurant, and yeah, they'll give you they can give you a big bowl of pho, but there's not that much meat in it, right? They'll give you like a couple of slices of meat and maybe some meatballs, and that's it, right? But my mom, she just packs it in with the meat. She packs it in with the meatballs. She packs it in with the beef. Oh, so good. It's so good. Yeah. And I took it to go. So I had some this morning too. It was good. I had a big bowl of pho and then I just took a nap. That was my day. Make sure to turn your VPN off. My VPN is already off. Thank you for the reminder. Did I put a ton of MSG in my pho? I didn't put MSG last night, but when I heated it up this morning, I sure put a lot of MSG, and it tasted excellent. My mom is anti MSG, and she's ridiculous. MSG is so good. Meat is just a condiment in traditional pho. I don't think so. Meat is one of the main things you put in pho. But restaurants usually don't give you a lot of meat. They usually skimp on that unless you go to a good restaurant. Yeah. And if you go to Vietnam, actual Vietnam, and go to an actual Vietnamese restaurant in Vietnam, don't like forget about it. They won't even you get like one piece of meat. All right. You go to like a small Vietnamese restaurant in Vietnam, they'll give you like one piece of meat. All right, if you're lucky. That's all you get. I think pho here is better just because we have more food. It is Sunday. I live in America. America. All right, guys. Let's get started. All right, chapter 21, in jail. Okay, looks like it's gonna be a long chapter today. So Ling Huchang just went unconscious, right? Before a black-white piece could figure out his mistake, his wrist was already seized. In a hurry, he rotated his wrist to grab back while pulling his arm back, and then swiftly kicked out his left foot. When Ling Huchang finally came around, he found himself surrounded by complete darkness, knowing neither where he was nor how long he had been out cold. The headache was so bad that he almost felt as though somebody had cracked his head open, and loud thunder-like rings still rumbled continuously in his ears. He tried in vain to get back onto his feet, but found no strength left in him at all. Did we just change names? Black-White piece. This is Mr. Black-White, right? Maybe we just changed translators, and they're using a different translation for the guy's name. I must be dead already, and have been buried into a grave, he thought, as the strong sense of grief and fuss quickly overwhelmed him, and he fainted once again. By the time he woke up the second time, although his headache didn't get any better, the ringing in his ears did lighten up a great deal. He felt something cold and hard underneath him, as though he was lying upon something made of iron or steel. A quick feel with his hand soon confirmed that it was indeed an iron plate underneath the straw mat. As soon as he moved his right hand, a light clank broke out, and at the same time he felt something icy cold tied around his wrist. When he tried to feel it with his left hand, the clanking sound rose again. Turned out that his left wrist also had something tied around it. A mixed feeling of shock, joy, and fear soared in his heart. Now he was sure that he had not died, but had been shackled. He felt it again with his left hand, and then came to a realization that it was a thin steel chain tied around his wrist. A slight move of his 2 feet also revealed steel chains shackled around his ankles. He opened his eyes as wide as he could and stared forward, but did not see even a glimmer of light. So it looks like he's shackled. What happened? I was having a sword match with the revered Mr. Run right here before I fainted. Now, Mr. Run is the old man that he fought. How did I fall for the machinations of the 4 playfellows of Jianan? He asked himself. It looks as though I am also locked up in the dungeon underneath the lake. Have I been locked up in the same cell together with the revered Mr. Ren? At that thought, he called out immediately, Revered Mr. Ren? Revered Mr. Ren. He called out twice, but did not hear anything in return. Feeling of great shock grew stronger and stronger in his heart, and he called out even louder, Mr. Run! Mr. Run! But once again, all he could hear in the pitch black were his own hoarse and vexed cries. As desperation began to sink in, he shouted out at the top of his lungs, First Master! Fourth Master! Why have you locked me in here? Let me out! Let me out! But other than his own shouting, there was not another sound all the while. Soon, panic turned into rage, and he began pouring out streams of abuses. You despicable, brazen, evil scum! You couldn't beat me in the sword matches, so you figured that you would lock me up in here to get even. How shameless you are! But the thought that he would be locked up in the dark dungeon underneath the lake for the rest of his life, just like the revered Mr. Run, instantly made his hair stand on end and his heart filled with despair. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. He couldn't help but bawl on top of his lungs, and before he knew it, the bawling had turned into loud wails, and tears had streamed down his cheeks uncontrollably. You four despicable scoundrels of the Plum Manor, he cried in a hoarse voice. If I can make it out of here one day, I'll blind your eyes with my sword and cut off both your arms and legs once I escape the dark dungeon. But suddenly he fell silent when a loud voice echoed in his head. Can I ever escape the dark dungeon? Can I ever escape the dark dungeon? Even revered Mr. Run, such a capable man, couldn't get out. How can I ever get out? Anxiety immediately surged in his heart. Feeling really sick in his stomach, he vomited, and after a few gags of blood, he fainted again. Machinations? Machinations like plans and schemes. Hey Katie, glad you could join. You're not late at all. You missed my Korean karaoke story, but it's okay. Dun, dun, dun. Aha, a plot or a scheme. I got the 2 words correct. Exactly. Man, I'm so smart. In the wooziness, he thought he heard a cracking sound, and immediately after, a bright light dazzled his eyes. Waking up abruptly, he leapt onto his feet, but he forgot that both of his wrists and ankles were still shackled by steel chains. Furthermore, he did not have much strength left in him, so only instants later he fell back down heavily, and all the bones in his body seemed to have been falling apart. Having been in complete darkness for a long while, his eyes were not adept to sudden lights, but for fear that the gleam of light might just vanish as abruptly as it appeared, voiding him of any opportunity to escape, he kept his eyes wide open and stared hard toward the origin of the light, despite the stinging pain. The gleam of light had come from a 1-foot wide, square-shaped opening, and he remembered at once the dungeon cell the revered Mr. Ren lives in also had a square-shaped opening on the iron door. In fact, it had one exactly identical to this one. He took a quick glance around and then confirmed that he was, indeed, also locked in the same kind of dungeon cell. "Let me out of here! Huang Zhong, Black-White, you despicable scoundrels! Let me out if you've got any guts!" he shouted out. A large wooden tray came forth slowly through the square-shaped opening, on top of which was a large bowl of rice, with some cooked food piled on top. There was also an earthen jar, which apparently held some soup or water. This sight made Ling Huchong even angrier, thinking, "Bringing food and water to me only means that you want to lock me in here for an extended period," so he cussed loudly. "You 4 dirty swine, listen up! If you want me dead, just come forward and give me your best shot. Stop playing games with your uncle here." But the wooden tray remained still. The person outside the door obviously wanted him to take the tray in. Infuriated, Ling Huchong reached out and struck it hard. Loud clangs echoed as the rice bowl and the earthen jar fell to the ground and smashed into pieces. Food and soup splashed everywhere. Slowly, the wooden tray retracted out of the opening. In a storm of rage, Ling Huchong threw himself at the square-shaped opening, and then he saw a completely gray-headed old man, a light in his left hand, and the wooden tray in his right hand, turning away unhurriedly. Deep wrinkles covered the man's entire face, a face Ling Huchong had never seen before. "Go get Huang Zhong or Black-White here. Tell those 4 shameless scoundrels to come here and fight me like a man, if they've gotten any guts," Ling Huchong shouted out. But the old man didn't pay him the slightest attention and kept walking further and further away unhurriedly, stooping low with his back. Ling Huchong watched on as the man slowly disappeared around the corner of the tunnel. The light also gradually dimmed until it finally faded into gloom. After a short while, he vaguely heard the sounds of gates opening, followed by sounds of the wooden gate and the iron gate closing down one after another. And then, once again, the tunnel was enveloped by complete darkness, without a glimmer of light or the slightest of sounds. Ling Huchong felt another strong dizziness in his head. After staring blankly into the blackness for a moment, he decided to lie down on the bed for better concentration with his thoughts. The old man delivering food to me must have had strict orders to not exchange any word with me. It would be useless to shout at him, he thought to himself. This dungeon cell looked identical to the one revered Mr. Ren lives in. I guess there are quite a few prison cells built under the Plum Manor. I wonder how many people they have locked up down here. If somehow I can connect with Mr. Ren or with any of the other fellow prisoners here by working together and uniting our efforts, who knows, we might be able to find a way out of here. At that thought, he extended his arm and knocked on the wall. But the clanking sounds clearly indicated that it was made of sheer steel. The sounds were both heavy and dull. Obviously, there was no space on the other side of the wall except solid ground. He walked to another wall and also knocked on it, but again the responding sounds were both heavy and dull. Not willing to give up, Ling Huchong sat back on the bed and knocked on the wall behind him. Once again, the sounds were still the same. Feeling his way along the walls, he carefully knocked on every inch of all the 3 walls, but other than the side of the wall with the iron door, this dungeon cell seemed to have been buried deep underground all along. There, of course, had to be other dungeon cells underground, but at least one another, which had been. I think that means at least one other, which had the Ren named old man locked in. But he had no clue where that dungeon cell might be, or even how far it was from his own cell. Leaning against the wall, he very carefully reviewed in his head the series of events that had happened before he fainted. He could remember how the old man's sword moves became faster and faster as his shouting also became louder and louder. Then, all of a sudden, there was that earth-shaking roar right after which he lost his consciousness. But how on earth was he captured by the 4 playfellows of Jianan and then sent to this prison cell? He couldn't remember a thing about it. The 4 manor masters all appeared to be talented persons of poetic temperaments on the surface. Even their day-to-day amusements are related to music, gamesmanship, calligraphy, and painting, these 4 arts. Who would have imagined that underneath their pretending skin, they were all filthy, contemptible characters who stop at no evil? Ling Hucheng thought to himself. There were many vile characters like these in the martial world, and it shouldn't have come to one's surprise. But the strange thing was that these 4 manor masters did hold genuine interest in the art of music, gamesmanship, calligraphy, and painting, which would have been impossible for them to pretend. When Mr. Baldbrush wrote the General Pei poem on the wall, his writing was completely free from inhibition, something not a normal martial arts master could have accomplished. Then he thought, Master once said only people with extreme aptitude are capable of extreme evil. That is so true. The scam the 4 playfellows of Jianan pulled is indeed hard to guard against. Suddenly a thought struck him. He cried out and jumped back onto his feet, his heart pounding madly. What happened to Big Brother Xiang? Has he fallen for their murderous scheme as well? But then he thought, Big Brother Xiang is a man of shrewdness and improvisation. He seems to have known about the 4 playfellows of Jianan's conducts beforehand. As the right advisor of the demon cult, he has roamed the martial world for many years. He won't fall for their trap easily, and as long as he is not stranded by the 4 playfellows of Jianan, he will try to rescue me, for sure. Even if I were to be locked up 1,000 feet below ground, Big Brother Xiang would still be able to get me out of here. He has the ability to do that. At that thought, he found himself much relaxed. Carrying a big grin on his face, he muttered to himself, Ling Hucheng, did you know that you are a real coward? Scared into crying like a baby. Where are you going to put your face if people find out about it? What's up, Chris Blue Fox? Hey! I've seen you in the comments, I have. Feeling relieved, he stood up slowly, then immediately realized how thirsty and hungry he had been. Too bad I threw a fit and knocked over the perfectly fine rice meal and the water. If I don't stuff myself after Big Brother Xian rescues me out of here, where am I going to find the strength to battle the 4 skunks of Jianan? That's right, the 4 skunks of Jianan. How can such vile skunks be worthy of the title 4 playfellows of Jianan? Out of the 4 skunks, Mr. Blackwhite had to be the most sinister one, always wearing that blank, collected countenance on his face. He probably is the only one who he is probably the one who came up with the entire scheme. Once I break out of here, killing him will be my first thing on my list. Mr. Paint, on the other hand, seems to be relatively frank. I might as well spare his despicable life. But in regard to his collection of great wines, I'll drink them all up, leaving not even one drop behind. At the thought of Mr. Paint's great wine collection, he found his mouth burning with thirst. How long have I been unconscious? Why hasn't Big Brother Xian come to my rescue? He wondered. Then another thought popped out. Oh no, if it were a fight, one-on-one, Big Brother Xian's kung fu skills are more than sufficient to defeat any one of the 4 skunks. But if those 4 skunks attack Big Brother Xian all at once, then Big Brother Xian would have had a hard time winning the battle. Even if Big Brother Xian gave full play to his ability and kill all 4 of them, it would be impossible for him to find the entrance of this underground dungeon. Who would have expected to find the dungeon entrance hidden underneath Mr. Huang Zhang's bed? Feeling completely worn out, he lay down on the bed when another thought suddenly came upon him. The revered Mr. Run's kung fu skills are undoubtedly greater than those of Big Brother Xian's, and his wit, experience, and foresight also outclass that of Big Brother Xian. Even he became a prisoner in the dungeon. What makes Big Brother Xian so special that he could ensure victory? Straightforward gentlemen often fall prey of machinations from the vile. It is well said that covert attack is far more difficult to defend against than an overt attack. Since Big Brother Xian hasn't come to my rescue after such a long while, could he have fallen for their trap? He instantly forgot all about his own trouble, but began worrying about Xian Wenxian's safety instead. He let his thoughts go off into wild flights of fancy, and before long he fell asleep. When he woke up again, he had no idea what time it was, and all he could see was still complete darkness. What's my favorite drink? Non-alcoholic? Boba tea, of course. Just a good, like green tea with boba. Yeah. It is simply impossible for me to escape by myself, he thought to himself. If unfortunately Big Brother Xian also falls for their scheme, then who else might come to free me? Master has announced to the entire world that I am expelled from the Huashan Sword School. Of course, people from the Orthodox schools won't be coming to my rescue. Ying Ying. As soon as he thought of Ying Ying, his spirit soared, and he sat up, thinking. She asked Old Man to spread the word to the entire martial world that she wants me killed. Those people from the unorthodox schools, of course, won't be coming to my rescue. But what about her, herself? If she learned that I am trapped here, she would surely come to save me. Many people from the unorthodox schools follow her command. All she needs to do is let the word out. He suddenly chortled, thinking, this girl is so bashful. What she fears the most is people saying that she likes me. Even if she does come to my rescue, she would surely come alone and would never ask for help from anyone. And if someone learns that she is coming to save me, he most probably would lose his life because of that. Alas, what goes on in a girl's thinking is truly incomprehensible. Like, for example, Little Apprentice's sister. As soon as Little Apprentice's sister came to his mind, his heart ached, and the feeling of grief and despair deepened. Oh, he's still into her, huh? Why am I hoping that someone might come and rescue me? By now, Little Apprentice's sister and Junior Apprentice Brother Lin probably have already wedded. Even if I can get out of here somehow, what's there to look for outside? It's probably much better if I get locked up in this dark dungeon for the rest of my life, and I never find out what happens outside. Once he figured out the benefits of being locked up in the dungeon, his worries seemed to have slipped away, and he even felt somewhat pleased with the situation. But the elated feeling did not last long when he was soon overwhelmed with hunger and thirst. Haunted by the memories of the great enjoyments he had when he drank bowls after bowl of wine served with large steaks in the various wine houses, he decided it would still be better if he could get out of the dungeon after all. Well, if Little Apprentice sister wedded Junior Apprentice Brother Lin, so what? I've already been pushed around by them many times anyhow. I am already an invalid, with none of my inner strength left in me. Dr. Ping said that I don't have many days left. Even if Little Apprentice's sister is willing to marry me, I can't marry her. How can I let her stay a widow for the rest of her life? But deep in his heart, he still felt that even though he wouldn't let Yue Lingshan marry him, even if she wanted to, Yue Lingshan's falling in love with Lin Pingzhi was just too agonizing for him to withstand. But what could he wish for? I wish Little Apprentice's sister were still the same as before. I wish none of this had ever happened, and I would still be practicing sword arts with her in the waterfall. atop Mount Huashan, and junior apprentice brother Lin never came to Mount Huashan, and little apprentice sister and I would be happily spending the rest of our lives together. Alas, Tianbo Guang, Peach Valley, Six Fairies, apprentice sister Yi Lin. At the thought of Hangshan Sword School's little sister Yi Lin, he could no longer hold a straight face, and a gentle smile crept onto his lips. I wonder how this apprentice sister Yi Lin is doing right now, he thought. If she learns that I am locked up here, she must be very worried. Her master undoubtedly wouldn't allow her to come and save me after reading the letter from my master, but she might ask her father, Monk No Commandment, to do it for her. Who knows, Monk No Commandment might even invite the Peach Valley Six Fairies to tag along. Those 7 are a total mess and would only mess things up even more, but having people coming to my rescue is still better than having no one paying any attention. Yeah, he is back to his emo phase again. Whenever he's alone with his own thoughts, he goes back to this emo territory. When he thought of the Peach Valley Six Fairies' constant nagging and arguing, he couldn't help but grin. When they were around him in the past, he did belittle the 6 brothers somewhat, but at this point in time, how he wished they could be accompanying him inside the prison cell. Their unintelligible remarks would have sounded like heavenly music to his ears at the moment. He let his thoughts run wild, and soon dozed off once again. In the pitch-black dungeon cell, he had no way of knowing the time. In his wooziness, he noticed a glimmer of faint light coming through the square-shaped opening. Ling Huchong was ecstatic. He sat up immediately, his heart thumping wildly, thinking, "Who has come to rescue me?" But his joy did not last long. Soon came the sound of heavy and slow footsteps, apparently from the old man who brought food to him. Much dispirited, he let his body collapse back down. "Ask those 4 skunks to come here, even if they still got any guts to show their faces here. See if they still got any guts to show their faces here," Ling Huchong shouted. He could hear the sound of the footsteps getting closer and closer. The light also became brighter and brighter. Then a wooden tray was pushed in front. It was pushed in from the square-shaped opening on the door. On the wooden tray, there were a large bowl of rice and an earthen jar, just like the last time. Ling Huchong had been fighting his hunger for a good while, and his thirst had also become unbearable. After a slight hesitation, he reached out and took the wooden tray. As soon as the old man let go of the wooden tray, he turned around to walk away. Hey, wait a second. I have something to ask you," Ling Huchong called out. But the old man completely ignored him. Sound of footsteps faded gradually as the old man dragged his feet along the way, and the light also fainted gradually. Ling Huchong murmured a few curses and then picked up the earthen jar. Raising the jar next to his mouth, he poured the contents into his mouth. Sure enough, the jar was filled with clear water. He drank up almost half a jar of water in one breath before touching the bowl of rice. Piled on top of the rice were some vegetables. He tasted them in the dark and was able to tell there were some radish, tofu, and the like. Oh, Patrick, you think we're deliberately being reminded of these characters just so we don't forget? Okay, yeah. There are, yeah, just so we don't forget that the Monk No Commandment exists and the Peach Valley Six Fairies exist. You know you are in hell when you feel like having those Peach Fairies around is a good thing. Yeah, that's right. He has some tofu. It's not just rice. So they seem to be feeding him decently. They didn't give him wine though, just water. The same routine went on for 7 or 8 days. The old man would bring food to him once every day, and then collect the previous days' utensils and water jar, together with the jug for human waste. Oh no. He has to poop in a jar. Regardless of what Ling Huchong said to him, his face remained expressionless. Then one day, as soon as Ling Huchong saw the light, he threw himself at the square-shaped opening and grabbed the wooden tray, shouting, "Why don't you speak to me? Haven't you heard me?" The old man pointed at his own ear and shook his head, indicating that he was deaf. Then he opened his mouth. What Ling Huchong saw shocked him, and he couldn't help but gasp. The old man only had half of his tongue left in his mouth. The scene was horrific. Someone cut your tongue off? Did the 4 goddamn manor masters do this to you? Ling Huchong uttered. The man did not answer, and simply pushed the wooden tray through the square-shaped opening. He obviously could not hear Ling Huchong's words. Even if he could, he had no way of answering. Ling Huchong was terrified. Even after the old man had long left, he couldn't bring himself to eat. The terrifying image of the old man's remaining portion of his tongue flashed again and again in front of his eyes. Those 4 skunks are too evil, he murmured to himself as hatred quickly filled his heart. Unless I am locked up here for life, if one day Ling Huchong can escape from this dungeon, I swear that I'll find the 4 skunks, and one by one I'll cut off their tongues, drill their ears, and prick their eyes. Suddenly he thought of something from deep within his memories. Could it have been them? Them? He remembered that night how he blinded the 15 masked men's eyes outside of the monastery, but as to the origin of those people he never found out. Could it be that they locked me up in this dungeon cell to take vengeance for their suffering? At that thought, he heaved a long sigh, and much of the grudge and hatred built up in the past many days evaporated instantly. I blinded those 15 men's eyes. It's only natural that they want their revenge, he thought aloud. Once his anger eased off, each day seemed to be a bit easier to get by. There was no difference between days and nights in the underground prison. Ling Huchong completely lost track of days and could only tell that each day was hotter than the previous. He figured that it must have been mid-summer already. There was not even a whiff of wind in the small dungeon cell. The humid heat just got worse and worse every day. Then the day came when the heat became simply unbearable. With steel chains shackled around his wrists and ankles, he could not take off his clothes completely. Having no other alternatives, he could only pull his shirt upward and pushed his pants downward as much as he could. After rolling the ragged mat on the bed and placing it to a corner of the bed, he lay down on the steel plate, half naked. Immediately, he felt cool and refreshing, and his perspiration also improved dramatically. It didn't take long for him to fall asleep. A few hours went by quickly. In the days when he felt the part of the steel plate under his body had been heated up by him, he moved his body inward to find a cooler spot. Pressing his left palm on the steel plate, he vaguely felt some kind of lines of patterns carved onto the steel plate. But in the heavy drowsiness, he paid no attention to it and soon was sound asleep. This nap was so comfortable. When Ling Huchong woke up, he felt completely refreshed. Not long after, the old man came as usual, delivering food to him. Ling Huchong had felt great sympathy for the old man, and every time when the old man pushed the wooden tray in through the square-shaped opening, he would always pinch the old man's finger gently, or pat a few times on the old man's hand to show his compassion. This time was no exception. After he took the wooden tray and was just about to retract his arms, all of a sudden, under the dim light, he spotted 3 words imprinted on the back of his left hand. It clearly said, "Wuxia gets stranded." Ling Huchong was dumbfounded, having no clue where these words had come from. After a short contemplation, he hurriedly placed the wooden tray on the floor and reached out to feel the steel plate on the bed. Turned out the steel plate was covered with carved words. So thickly dotted, he couldn't even tell how many there were. Ling Huchong understood at once. The words were carved onto the steel plate before he even came, but because the plate had always been covered by the mat, he never found out about it until yesterday when he slept half naked directly on top of the plate. That was how the words got imprinted on the back of his hand. Extending his hand to his backside, he felt his back and his behind, and he was unable to stifle a laugh. There were words marked on his skin everywhere he felt. Each character was about the size of a copper coin. The strokes were deep, but the handwriting was hasty and careless. By then, the old man who delivered the food had been long gone, and the dungeon cell was once again engulfed in complete darkness. Ling Huchong's curiosity overpowered his hunger. After taking a few drinks from the earthen jar, he began feeling the words carved on the steel plate slowly from the very beginning, one character at a time, and read them out in a soft voice. I have been straightforward and willful all my life, killing people like flies. Imprisonment underneath the lake probably is the retribution I deserve. Only that when the old fellow Run Wo Xing gets stranded. At this character, Ling Huchong thought, so the words Wo Xing gets stranded came from this sentence. He went on feeling the characters, and the words continued. Here, his extraordinary divine art, which exceeds lofty, will inevitably perish together with the old fellow's skeleton, and people in the afterlife would not have known his exceptional and magical power. What a great pity that would be. Ling Huchong paused and raised his head. Old fellow Ran Wo Xing. Old fellow Ran Wo Xing, he pondered. Then the man who carved these words, of course, is named Ren Wo Xing. So this man's last name is Ren as well. I wonder if he is related to the revered Mr. Ren in any way. But then he thought the better of it. This underground prison probably was built a long time ago, and the man who carved these words probably had passed away decades or even centuries ago. He went on feeling the characters and the carvings read, that's why I am writing down the succinct principles and secrets of my divine art, so people from the after time can practice the divine art and gain the ability to freely roam the world. Then, although the old man's flesh will perish, his name will become immortal. Number 1, sitting meditation. Then what followed were various breathing exercises and meditation techniques. Ever since Ling Huchong learned the Dugu 9 swords, he was only fond of sword art in the many types of martial arts, and since he had lost all his inner strength, when he recognized the words sitting meditation, his heart was filled with disappointment. He hoped that somewhere in the remaining words he would be able to find a form of exceptional sword art, and he might as well learn this sword art as self-entertainment inside the dark dungeon cell. The hope of escape had become more and more distant and indistinct. But if he didn't find something to occupy himself, life in prison would be very difficult. But the words afterwards were always terms for inner strength cultivation, such as breathing, concentrate the spirits in the lower abdomen, redirecting the strength to Jin Jing, Ren channel, and the like. He followed the characters all the way to the end of the steel plate and still couldn't even find one character resembling the character Sword. Ling Huchong found himself utterly frustrated. What extraordinary divine art which exceeds the lofty. This man has played a good joke on me. It could have been any other type of martial arts. Why did it have to be an art of inner strength cultivation, the only one I cannot practice? As soon as I try to gather my inner strength, the energy streams inside my chest and abdomen would roll over and clashing with one another. I'd be asking for trouble myself if I practiced inner strength cultivation. He heaved a heavy sigh and picked up the rice bowl to eat, thinking to himself, what kind of character is this Ren Wo Xing? He was certainly very arrogant, talking about exceeding lofty and roaming the world, as though he had no match in the entire world. It turned out this dungeon is specifically used to imprison superior kung fu masters. Succinct? Succinct means short, I believe. Brief and short. Succinct. There you go. Concise, short, brief. When first discovered the words carved on the steel plate, his excitement soared high, but by now he had the least interest left in him, and thinking, heaven can really play tricks on mortals. I probably wouldn't feel so down if I never found these words. Then he thought, if that Run Wo-sing was as capable as how he boasted himself, why he was still stranded here and couldn't get away. Evidently, this underground prison is simply too durable and secure to break out. Regardless of how capable the captive is, once he is locked in, all he could do is slowly, painfully wait for his end to come. Having come to a conclusion, he paid no more attention to the words on the steel plate. The city of Hangzhou almost turned into a steam box in the hot summer time. The dungeon was located deep underneath the lake. Without getting the heat from the direct sunshine, it should have been much cooler. But firstly, the dungeon had no ventilation. And secondly, it had always been overly humid. It was simply a different type of misery for its occupant. Every day, Ling Huchang would strip as much clothing as he could and sleep on the steel plate half naked. Whenever he moved his hand, he would feel the carved characters on the steel plate. As days went by, he had memorized many of the words and sentences unconsciously. One day, when he was wondering where his master, master wife, and little apprentice sister might be, and whether they had returned to Mount Huashan, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps coming toward him. This time the sound was quick and light, completely different from the sound made by the old man who delivered food. After spending many days locked inside, he had not been as anxiously looking forward to a rescuer, so when he suddenly heard the sound of a different set of footsteps, the feeling of surprise and joy instantly welled up in his heart. He had wanted to leap to his foot, but the ecstasy was so strong and overwhelming, he suddenly lost all his strength and could only lie still on the bed, not able to move a muscle. The sound of footsteps quickly approached the iron door. A voice came from outside the iron door. Mr. Ren, it has been very hot in the last couple of days. May I ask if you still enjoy your good health? From the sound of the speech, Ling Huchang recognized the speaker as Mr. Blackwhite. If Mr. Blackwhite had come to his cell a month before, Ling Huchang would have shouted abuses and swore viciously at him. However, having spent quite some time being imprisoned, his anger had greatly disappeared, and he was able to think calmly. He thought, why does he call me Mr. Run? Has he gotten the prison cells mixed up? Immediately, he kept silent and only listened to Mr. Blackwhite, who continued, every 2 months I come and ask you the same question. Today is the first day of July, so please let me ask again. Would you agree to my request? Mr. Blackwhite asked this question very respectfully. Ling Huchang secretly laughed and thought, Mr. Blackwhite really got the wrong prison cell and thinks I am Senior Ren. How did it happen? Immediately his heart turned cold when he thought, among the Jiannan 4 playfellows, Mr. Blackwhite is the most meticulous. If this person were Mr. Baldbrush or Mr. Paint, it's possible that they could get the wrong prison cell. But how can Mr. Blackwhite actually make such a mistake? There must be a reason behind this. Therefore, he still kept silent while Mr. Blackwhite said, Venerable Ren, you are a great hero. Why do you choose to languish and decay in an underground prison? If you consent to my request, I will keep my promise and help you get out of this prison. Hearing this, Ling Huchang's heart thumped madly, and innumerable thoughts raced through his mind. Mr. Blackwhite comes by himself to ask a request, but I don't have any clues what his intentions are. Mr. Blackwhite asked again, Venerable Ren, will you consent to my request? Alright guys, let's take a 5-minute break. Alright, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Okay, so our hero is stuck in this prison, and he can't get out. And it seems like he's been there for 1 or 2 months. And now Mr. Blackwhite is coming and offering him, well, he thinks he's Mr. Run, and offering him a way out if he consents to his request, which we haven't heard yet. Ling Huchong knew that this currently may be the opportunity to get out of his trouble. He doesn't know why he is inexplicably stranded in this jail cell. He doesn't know that he doesn't know what Mr. Blackwhite is after or what his intentions are. For fear that Mr. Blackwhite may recognize his voice and to see what kind of opportunity might present itself, he held his tongue and kept silent. Mr. Blackwhite sighed and said, "Venerable Ren, how can you not make a sound? Previously, when that boy surnamed Feng came to compare sword skills with you, with great kindness you kept my requests and visits secret. I thought that sword fight might have aroused great heroic feelings in your heart. Outside, the world is broad and alive. Once you leave this dark prison cell, nobody in the world, male or female, old or young, would dare defy you, and the world would be yours for the taking. Wouldn't that be very satisfying rather than rotting in this jail cell? Why do you keep stubbornly refusing me for 12 years? Ling Huchong felt that Mr. Blackwhite seems to sincerely believe that he is addressing Senior Ren. He was more puzzled in his heart and wondered what this matter was that Mr. Blackwhite wants consent for. Ling Huchong desired to learn more details about the matter, but he was also anxious and that if he revealed himself, the situation could turn bad immediately, and thus dared not make a sound. Mr. Blackwhite continued, "Old Gentleman Ren, you are indeed very tenacious. I'll be back again in 2 months. Goodbye." Suddenly, with a gentle smile, he added, "Today, unlike other times, you did not scold me. It looks like you may be thinking more favorably towards my request. I will come back in 2 months' time to ask you to consider my request again." Saying this, Mr. Blackwhite turned around to go to the exit. Ling Huchong became quite worried when he thought Mr. Blackwhite would not come back for another 2 months once he quit the underground. A day in this dark prison seemed like a year for him already. How can he bear to wait 2 months? He waited for Mr. Blackwhite to take several steps away, and then clears his throat and said in a thick voice, "What matter do you ask me to consent?" Mr. Blackwhite turns around immediately and came quickly to the square hole in front of the prison door and said tremblingly, You are willing to consent?" Ling Huchong turned around to the wall, put the palm of his hand on his mouth, and said in a muffled voice, "What matter do you want me to consent to?" Mr. Blackwhite answered, "For 12 years, I have taken a lot of risk visiting you 6 times a year to earnestly request the same matter. How could Mr. Run not know already what I am requesting?" Ling Huchong let out a loud humph and muttered, "Huh, I have forgotten." Mr. Blackwhite replied, "I asked Senior to teach me your great Qigong method fully in exchange promised to help you escape from this prison." Ling Huchong deliberated. Has he really mistaken me for Senior Ren? Or is this a clever trick that he is pulling with me? I am not sure what he really means and must think for a while. Thinking this, Ling Huchong mumbled something indistinct. Mr. Blackwhite naturally could not understand the reply, so asked repeatedly, Does Senior consent? Does Senior consent?" Ling Huchong asked, "How can I trust you to keep your word in this arrangement?" Mr. Blackwhite asked in reply, "What will serve as a guarantee for Senior to believe my words?" Ling Huchong said, "We must have an agreement." Mr. Blackwhite answered, "Senior is worried that after teaching me this big method, I will break my promise and not let you escape, right? Senior must put your trust in my arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Mr. Blackwhite asked in return with evident surprise and pleasure. So, Senior has consented? Ling Hu Chong thought very quickly. He asked if I will pass him the big way method. How do I pass on this method? To him, I might as well listen to what he means by this arrangement. If I manage to deceive him using these secrets on the iron panel, he can let me out of here. When Mr. Blackwhite did not hear an answer, he added, After Senior pass the big method to me, then I will be your disciple, disciples of the Sun Moon sect, who deceive their masters and obliterate their roots, have always been punished with the slow and lingering process of having their skin peeled off and their limbs dismembered. No one has been able to escape it in the last several hundred years. How will then disciple dare not help Senior escape? Ling Hu Chong humphed and replied, So that's how it is. Then, after 3 days, you can come and get your answer from me. Mr. Blackwhite said, If Senior will consent to my request, why would you want to delay and spend 3 days in this dark prison cell? Ling Hu Chong thought, He is more impatient than me. Even though I will have to suffer for 3 more days, it might give me time to see what clever trick he might pull, and produce several humps, as if he was really angry at Mr. Blackwhite's impertinence. Hearing the humps, Mr. Blackwhite hurriedly agreed and said, Right, yes, after 3 days I will come here and consult you again. Ling Hu Chong had disquieting thoughts after listening to Mr. Blackwhite going out of the tunnel and then closing the iron gate. How can Mr. Blackwhite mistaken me for Senior Ren? Mr. Blackwhite is very astute. How did he end up making such a mistake? He suddenly remembered, is it possible that Mr. Huangjong found out that Mr. Blackwhite's been secretly visiting this cell every 2 months this past 12 years? Perhaps Mr. Huangjong had imprisoned Senior Ren secretly in another room and had actually put me in here? Do the playfellows think that Ling Hu beat Ren? Did they lose the bet? We don't know, right? We don't know what happened. Like, where is Mr. Ren? Why is he here in jail? Why is Ling Hu Chong here in jail? And what happened after that fight? We don't know. All kinds of strange thoughts went through his mind, going this way and that way, but he still was not able to guess what Mr. Blackwhite's true intentions were. After some time, he became extremely weary and fell asleep. As soon as he woke up, his first thought was, if Brother Xian were here, with his experience, he may be able to guess Mr. Blackwhite's intention relatively quickly. Senior Ren was obviously very smart, maybe smarter than Brother Xian, and escaped from his mouth in a shout. He thought to himself, for the last 12 years, Senior Ren refused to consent Mr. Blackwhite's entreaties. Naturally, this must be because there must be a strong reason. He is the type of person who must surely know how formidable his enemies are. Immediately, he reasons, Senior Ren no doubt was not able to consent. How am I going to be able to consent when clearly I'm not at the same level as Senior Ren? Definition of astute? Astute? Where is that? Wait, where's that sentence? Mr. Blackwhite is very astute. Astute means like detail oriented. I'm gonna say. I'm pretty sure that's what that means. detail oriented, or like he notices things. Yeah. Having or showing an ability to accurately assess situations or people and deter. I think that's right, right? Does that, did I say it correctly? I think I'm right. Yeah, let me know, chat. Did I say the right definition of astute? Having decided, he started tracing the handwriting on the iron panel silently to memorize the instructions, thinking, I must manage to understand this rotten skill. Otherwise, when I teach him, I might blurt out something he would disbelieve. Only my voice and Senior Run's voice are too different that I have to really dampen my voice. I can shout one word and mute the other one. That way it becomes more ambiguous and not easy for him to find out. Using mnemonics, he started memorizing the text by shouting them out in a very loud voice, knowing that the dark prison cell is deep down underneath the lake, separated from the nearest exit by a long tunnel and 2 gates in between. Even if numerous firecrackers were exploding in the prison cell, it is unlikely for the least bit of sound to go outside. Ling Huchong then switched to singing in an operatic style, making up lyrics using the mnemonics from the instructions on the iron panel. Afterwards, thinking rude thoughts about the 4 skunks of Jianan, he was unable to restrain himself and laughed heartily. Suddenly, Ling Huchong came to the sentence, when inner energy is stored in the Dan Tian, the pubic region. No. It is like a reservoir that can accommodate a large amount of water. Once things have come to a rest, the energy will then be distributed to other parts of the body. Ling Huchong had read this sentence several times before, but he did not think deeply about its meaning because he thoroughly disliked practicing breathing exercises. Just now he grasped the meaning of the sentence and found it very strange. When Master teaches us the basics of inner strength cultivation, he teaches that the cultivated energy has to be stored in the lower abdomen, from where it acts as a source of power. Why did these instructions actually say energy cannot be saved in the Dantian? If inner strength cannot reside there, where should it go? The practice of this sentence is contrary to all the martial arts methods of inner strength cultivation, including that of Huashan's. This big technique, it must be a joke. Mr. Blackwhite is mean and shameless. Why don't I pass this method on to him and let him work it out? Mnemonics? Mnemonics are like word techniques to memorize something for memory. Like, yeah, so using like word techniques so you can better memorize something. Mnemonic. A device such as a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations that assists in remembering something. That's right. Dantian is not the pubic region. It's how come it says, it does say lower abdomen, but then it says pubic region here. That's weird. Tracing the handwriting on the iron panel, Ling Huchong slowly ponders over the meaning. The first several hundred characters teaches techniques to disperse a person's own inner energy completely. Realizing this, he was startled into wondering, who in the world is so stupid that he is willing to lose a lifetime of inner energy cultivation and practice the instructions here? Only a person who has made up his mind to commit suicide would be willing. On the other hand, if a person were to commit suicide, wouldn't a sword slash across the neck be quicker? Why waste so much time to kill oneself? Getting rid of internal energy is certainly much more difficult than cultivating it. How is this method really useful? So the writing on the panel says that you must teaches techniques to disperse a person's inner energy completely, just to erase your inner energy. Wait, it already happened. He's already done it, right? Thinking of the coming meeting with Mr. Blackwhite, Ling Hucheng couldn't help but get depressed. It will not take Mr. Blackwhite long to find out that the worthlessness of this method and realize that he's been cheated. Teaching him this method may not work out well. Ling Hucheng worried that while continuing to recite more of the mnemonics, the energy enters the dantian and then disperses into the body through the arteries. After reading for a while, he became angry and hit the iron bed, saying, "Damn this person!" Just because he was angry for being stuck in this dark prison cell, he arranged this clever trick to make fun of other people. Ling Hucheng scolded the previous occupants of his cell for a while and then fell asleep. In his sleep, his mind continued going over the energy enters the dantian and then disperses into the body through the arteries, part of the inner energy cultivation method on the iron panel, and unconsciously his body followed the method's directions. Suddenly, he felt some of the inner energy in his body flowing out from the dantian and dispersing through his arteries into all parts of his body. He was overcome with a strong urge to defecate and was quite uncomfortable. He became constipated. After a good while, he became consciously aware of streams of inner energy moving throughout his body, while his dantian remained calm. Oh, this is not good. My inner energy is certainly not flowing out. How can it be that I have not turned into a disabled person instantly? Startled, he immediately sat up and probed his energy. The streams of energy inside him seemed to be circulating throughout and energizing his body. He was quite dizzy at first, but after some time felt all his conflicting inner energies settle down and was pleasantly surprised. The illness I suffered from was difficult to cure because there were 7 or 8 heterogeneous inner energies from the Peach Valley 6 immortals and Monk No Commandments running wild in my body. Dr. Ping was unable to treat me. Shaolin Abbot, Master Feng Zheng, said that only the Tendon Altering Sutra will be able to tame the energy streams and cure me. The method engraved on the iron panel, however, does not teach me how to cultivate inner energy, but how to disperse it. Hey Ling Hucheng, fate is certainly on your side. While others fear the loss of their inner strength, you actually benefit from it. Wait, did I miss a paragraph? Oh, I'm sorry. Which one? Da, da, da. I don't remember. I hope it wasn't important. Thus, Ling Hucheng unceasingly continues to read aloud the mnemonics for the rest of the day. That night, in his dreams, he was still going over the concepts unconsciously, making sense of it and practicing it in his sleep, but he couldn't fully understand the method beyond the first line. By now, his spirit was inspired to fully comprehend the method and see the results for himself. Now, at last, he sat cross-legged and put into practice what he had learned. After practicing for a while, he sensed the long pent-up heterogeneous energies getting wild in his dantian and dispersing into his arteries. Although he still cannot get rid of the remaining energy streams, the tension in his body was greatly reduced. He felt extremely happy and sang songs until his voice became hoarse. Originally, he was singing and shouting loudly to find a way to disguise his voice. Now, unexpectedly, his voice had become hoarse, and he thought, Run Wo Sing, Run Wo Sing, you leave these methods on the iron panel with the intention of injuring someone. How would you have known that your method would prove harmless to me, and in fact benefit me a great deal? You must be turning over in your grave with anger. Ha 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 ha. During this brief practice, even though the energy streams were not completely dispersed, he felt somewhat comfortable. He thought, after I got the energy streams from the Peach Valley 6 Immortals and Monk No Commandment dispersed, I will have to regain my internal strength by practicing what my master taught me at Huashan. Since I will have to start over from the beginning, I fear I must spend a part of my life to recover what I have lost. If Brother Xian Wunxian finally came and rescued me from here. That's okay. Just start the chapter from the beginning. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna start from the very beginning of the chapter and read it all over again. Just because I missed a paragraph. So it seems like he has a method to disperse those energy streams. Maybe that's a good thing. Suddenly, Ling Huchong thought that both master and master wife expelled me from the Huashan sect. Why should I practice Huashan schools' internal strength again? In the martial world, there are many ways of cultivating internal strength. Why couldn't I ask for Brother Xian Wenxian or Ying Ying's help in this and study from them? This made him less miserable and excited. After eating the day's meal, he practiced the technique again. He sensed his body become more and more comfortable and couldn't help but laugh heartily. Suddenly he hears Mr. Blackwhite calling to him outside the prison door. Senior, I hope you are feeling well. Junior is here to serve you. Ling Huchong has been concentrating only on learning and practicing the inner energy technique of Run Wo Xing for the past 3 days that not only had he forgotten how much time has passed, but also didn't notice Mr. Blackwhite's arrival. It was lucky that he hadn't spoken a word before and gave himself away. He let out several hollow laughs and as answer to Mr. Blackwhite. Mr. Blackwhite said, It seems today Senior is feeling very high-spirited. How should your disciple, proceed? Ling Huchong deliberately considered, should I consent and receive him as a disciple and pass on this method on the iron panel? As soon as he opens the door to come in, he would immediately see that I am not Senior Run and naturally would get angry enough to kill me on the spot. On the other hand, if I were to pass on the whole method, even if he still believed me to be Senior Run, once he finished practicing, most likely he would try to kill me rather than help me escape. All he has to do is put some poison in the meal and I am done for. No wonder Senior Run was not willing to pass on the method to him for the last 12 years. When Mr. Blackwhite did not hear an answer, he said, After Senior passes the big method to me, the disciple will serve you with a fat chicken and good wine to show filial piety. Ling Huchong had been in prison for more than a month and a half. Every day he has been only eating green vegetables and tofu. The sound of a fat chicken and good wine was too tempting. With his mouth salivating greedily, he said, Good, you can first bring me a fat chicken and some good wine. After I have eaten them to my heart's content, I will pass on the method to you. Mr. Blackwhite hurriedly replied, Well, I will certainly bring you good food and wine. However, I'm afraid it will not be possible to bring them today. Tomorrow, if I have a lucky chance, I will then bring my offerings. Ling Huchong said, Why is it not possible to bring the food today? Mr. Blackwhite replied, To get here, I have to pass through my eldest brother's bedroom. Only when he's away I can. Ling Huchong snorted but did not say a word. Mr. Blackwhite was worried about Mr. Huang Zhang's return to the bedroom, and not daring to delay, he said goodbye and went away. Okay, so no one knows about this. No one knows about these visits. Ling Huchong in his heart thought that if I can tempt Mr. Blackwhite to come into the prison cell, would I be able to kill him? He is sly, and it would be impossible to swindle him. Even if I was able to kill Mr. Blackwhite, I still won't be able to pull off these chains on my hand and foot to get out of here. With this last thought, his right hand unconsciously went to the steel ring on his left wrist and made an effort to pull. As soon as he pulled the ring, it unexpectedly yielded and widened. Excited, he pulled the circle wider and wider until his left wrist was free from the shackle. Pleasantly surprised, he examined the steel ring only to find a fracture there. He would not have been able to pull apart even the fractured steel ring in his original state when he had no inner strength. However, within the last 2 days, he had been able to disperse the combined inner strengths of the 6 Peach Valley Immortals and the monk No Commandment throughout his body, and this had given birth to a strong inner force. He found an identical fracture on the steel ring on his right wrist. He had traced over these steel rings several times before, but hadn't noticed these fractures until now. Oh, so it looks like he's completely gotten rid of the other like energy streams in his body. And somehow he pulled his wrist out of these chains. All right, and the chains had cracks in them before. All right. The definition of filial, I think it means having something to do with family, like having to do with family. Of or due from a son or daughter. Yeah. Like filial piety is like respect for your parents. So he's out, guys. He's done. He's out. He got his hands free. Using his left hand, he immediately freed his right hand and then examined the shackles on his ankles and found fractures in both. After expending much effort, he was able to free himself completely from all the shackles. By this time, his whole body was perspiring profusely, and he felt quite breathless. Puzzled, he asked himself, why does each steel ring have a fracture? How could these shackles with fractures have fettered anyone? The next day, the deaf and mute old man delivered the daily meal. Using the light which came with the old man, Ling Huchong was able to see that in the place where the steel rings have fracture, they have been cut through. They have been cut through with a very fine and extremely thin steel wire saw. There were no rust on the fractures, indicating that the cuts were made recently. He asked himself, how come these shackles have been cut? Is someone trying to rescue me in secret? This underground prison is so well hidden, it's unlikely that my rescuer is someone from the outside. This person must surely be from this lone manor. He must not have been willing to plot against me and imprison me here. While I was unconscious, he must have come here secretly and used the steel wire saw to cut the shackles. It follows that my rescuers cannot openly declare himself an enemy of this manor, so he can only act when he has an opportunity. He will surely help me escape when the next opportunity arises. Thinking this, his spirits was greatly lifted. That night, in his dream, Ling Huchong saw Mr. Paint coming forward, opening the door of the prison cell and letting him out. Awakening with a start, Ling Huchong realized that it was only a Nankei dream. A Nankei dream is a saying that comes from a well-known Tang Dynasty performance. Okay, thank you. They didn't put a superscript here. An illusory joy that was not true. However, he did not become depressed. Instead, he thought He has not come to rescue me today, only because he has not had the opportunity to do so. He will naturally come and rescue me soon. The mnemonics and methods on the steel plates are extremely useful to me, but terribly dangerous to others. Anyone else who gets incarcerated in this dark prison in the future would naturally be a good man, so he cannot be allowed to fall into Run Wall Xing's great trap. Thinking this, Ling Huchong traced the words on the steel plate with his fingers and read the entire passage 10 times from beginning to end. Then he took the iron handcuff and scraped off more than 10 words in the passage. Mr. Blackwhite did not come that day, but Ling Huchong did not care about it. Instead, he continued to cultivate his internal energy according to the methods stated by the mnemonics. Mr. Blackwhite did not appear for many more days. Soon, Ling Huchong began to feel a significant improvement in his practice of the methods. For 6 to 7/10 of the diverging energy streams that the 6 fairies of the Peach Valley and the No Commandment Monk. Why are they changing the names? The diverging energy streams that the 6 valleys of the the 6 fairies of the Peach Valley and the No Commandment Monk left in his body had been expelled from the Dantian and dispersed along the channels of Run and Du. He thought, I only have to persevere, and all the diverging energy streams will be completely expelled. Ling Huchong recited the full set of mnemonics more than 10 times each day before scraping off yet another 10 words or so from the steel plate. As he did, he began to notice an increase in his strength. He no longer needed to exert himself much when he scraped the steel plate with the iron handcuff. More than a month had passed in this manner. Although he was trapped in the underground, he could feel a gradual drop in the sweltering summer temperature. He thought, there is indeed divine intervention during the time of darkness. If I had been incarcerated during winter, I would not have found the words in the steel plate at all. Perhaps Mr. Paint would have had me rescued before summer comes again. He really believes that Mr. Paint is rescuing him for some reason. Suddenly, Ling Huchong heard the sound of footsteps outside and recognized them as Mr. Blackwhite's. He quickly turned his face towards the wall from his resting position on the bed. Mr. Blackwhite stopped outside of the prison door and apologetically spoke. Senior Ren, I am truly very sorry not to have come earlier. Daily, I was anxious to come and pay you my respect, but did not get a chance because my eldest brother did not leave his room. I hope you are not offended because of the long wait. Saying this, Mr. Blackwhite opened the square-shaped opening of the prison door, and the fragrant smell of wine and roasted chicken wafted through into the cell. It had been many days since Ling Huchong had tasted a drop of wine. As soon as the smell of wine hit his nose, he quickly turned around and said, Quickly, give me the food and wine. Yes. Has Senior decided to teach me your marvelous secret technique? Replied Mr. Blackwhite. Ling Huchong answered, Each time you deliver 3 caddies of liquor and a chicken, I will teach you 4 mnemonics. This way you would have learned the entire method by the time you have delivered me 1,000 chickens with accompanying liquor. Senior Master, I am afraid too much time will be wasted with this arrangement. Can you not teach me 8 mnemonics at a time in exchange for 2 chickens and 6 caddies of liquor? Mr. Blackwhite bargained. Ling Huchong smiled at this and said, You are certainly greedy, but I won't disagree with your proposal. Come, give me the food. Through the square opening, Mr. Blackwhite handed over a wooden plate with a plate full of fruit, a pot of wine, and a fat chicken. Ling Huchong thought, since I have not taught you the mnemonics, you wouldn't have put poison in the food to kill me right now. Not able to resist any longer, he picked up the wine pot and took big gulps of it. The wine was not really good, but Ling Huchong savored the taste of it as if he were drinking Mr. Paints' beautifully mellow Turfan grape wine, which has been distilled and fermented for 4 cycles. After drinking half the pot, he tore into a huge chunk of chicken leg, chewed it with relish. Taking turns eating and drinking, he emptied the wine pot and picked the chicken clean. He patted his belly and with a great approval declared, "Good liquor, good liquor." Mr. Blackwhite says with a smile, "Now that Senior has eaten the fat chicken and drank the good wine, will you please teach me the mnemonics?" Ling Wuchang noticed that Mr. Blackwhite did not acknowledge him as a teacher again, but only talked about giving him the food and wine. Momentarily, he was at a loss, thinking of a suitable answer, and did not reply immediately. Finally, he said, "Good. Remember these 4 mnemonics well. Gather the energy in your dantian and direct it towards you and Shanzhong points through the 8 channels. Do you understand?" The original mnemonics written on the steel panel was, "Gather the energy in the dantian and then disperse it to the 4 limbs through the 8 channels." Ling Wuchang had deliberately changed the meaning of the method. Oh, he's teaching him the wrong martial arts. He's just changing some words. I don't think it's going to end well for this Mr. Blackwhite. What's a caddy of liquor? Well, a caddy has to be some kind of container, right? For liquor? Yeah. Some kind of thing that a thing that holds water or liquid. What was it? A slingshot, that cannot be right. Caddy. Caddy. Is that how you spell it? Caddies. Definition, caddies. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's no definition. Malevolent, bitchy, nasty. No, that's not right. Catty. Cruel, no, that's not right. Any of various units of weight. Oh, shit. Is this the one? This can't be it. It's a unit of weight. No, because he definitely said 3 caddy. Oh. Oh, shit. It's not a container. It's like saying 3 pounds or something. Ah. Ah, you got me. I was so sure that that meant a container. All right, that's a unit of weight. Oh, you got me. All right, that's one song. Good job. Congratulations. Oh, why did they use that? Dun, 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 dun. In Mr. Blackwhite's mind, these 4 mnemonics do not seem wonderful or extraordinary. He felt the method is not different from any ordinary breathing exercise method. So he asked, "Senior, could you tell me the 4 mnemonics again? Because I don't quite understand it yet." Ling Wuchang thought to himself, "When I changed these 4 mnemonics, they became quite ordinary. I do not have sufficient knowledge to fool him. I will read something extremely strange to frighten him." So he said, "Today is the first day of the month. I will teach you 4 more mnemonics. You should try to memorize it well. Maintain positive energy by splitting it along Zheng channel and dissipate the negative energy through a strategic pass." Mr. Blackwhite said in alarm, This
This sentence is very strange. How does a person achieve success by passing energy through 8 channels? Your junior, does not understand these mnemonics completely.
Ling Huchong said,
How can such a rare and wonderful inner energy cultivation method be easily understood by everyone? It's simply not possible for an average man to understand the complex and subtle meanings of this method so easily.
At this point, Mr. Blackwhite, who has been intently listening, became more and more aware of differences in the tone and manner of speaking between Ling Huchong and Senior Ren, and cannot help but suspect that the speaker is not Senior Ren. Uh-oh. Wait, why 6 songs? 1 song. That's 1 song. Where did you get this idea of singing 6 songs? I got 1 definition wrong, that's 1 song. But looks like Mr. Blackwhite is a little suspicious. This time, somewhat intoxicated with wine, Ling Huchong had spoken much. Mr. Blackwhite has... Wait. I missed a sentence. I just start over. At this point, Mr. Blackwhite, who has been intently listening, became more and more aware of differences in the tone and manner of speaking between Ling Huchong and Senior Ren, and cannot help but suspect that the speaker is not Senior Ren. Ling Huchong had spoken to him twice before, but he had muffled his voice and said very little. This time, somewhat intoxicated with wine, Ling Huchong had spoken much. Mr. Blackwhite had been on high alert for any suspicious signs because he expected Ling Huchong will make up the mnemonics. So, to be sure that he was not being cheated, he asked,
Senior, did you say the energy is cultivated when the divided energy from 8 channels are completely dispersed?
Ling Huchong answered, Naturally. Sensing that Mr. Blackwhite is getting suspicious, Ling Huchong dared not to say more than,
You would have to study what I have taught you You would have to study what I have taught you comprehensively to completely understand it.
So saying, he put the wine pot on the wooden tray and pushed it through the square hole. Mr. Blackwhite held out his hand to receive the tray. Ling Huchong suddenly cried out, Oh! And at the same time leaned his body forward and hit the iron door with his forehead. What the hell? Startled, Mr. Blackwhite uttered,
How? This person possesses excellent Wugong skills with extremely fast response,
and put his hand through the square hole searchingly where he came into contact with the wooden tray. Nervously, he grabbed the tray lest the wine pot fall to the ground and break. Just at that moment, as quick as lightning, Ling Huchong grabbed Mr. Blackwhite's right hand with his left hand and said with a laugh,
Mr. Blackwhite, do you know who I am?
Mr. Blackwhite was greatly surprised that he uttered in a trembling voice,
You...
When Ling Huchong handed the wooden tray out, he did not have the intention of grabbing Mr. Blackwhite's hand. However, when he saw Mr. Blackwhite's palm shaking under the faint light of the oil lamp while he was waiting to hand over the wooden tray, he felt a sudden impulse that he found impossible to suppress. He had been imprisoned here for many days because of this person's sly and calculated tricks. So if he were able to break Mr. Blackwhite's wrist, he would be able to vent a little of his anger and hatred. Also, Mr. Blackwhite is likely to be frightened stiff if his hand was suddenly seized. Since this person is so deceitful, what was wrong with scaring him? He was unsure if it was for revenge or due to his mischievous nature when he pretended to fall and led Mr. Blackwhite to stretch out his hand to be grabbed. It goes without saying that Mr. Blackwhite had been extremely vigilant, but what happened to him occurred very suddenly and extremely fast. Even if he had foreknowledge, he would not have been able to evade from getting his wrist captured. Mr. Blackwhite hurriedly twisted his hand around to loosen his opponent's vice-like grip.
on his wrist. As he twisted around by chance, his inside pass and outside pass acupuncture points fell directly under the fingers of his opponent. Unbelievably, he felt his inner energy coming out of the 2 points. Just at that time, with a loud sound, 3 of the toes of his foot broke, and in extreme pain, he shouted out. How is it that Mr. Blackwhite strangely injured his left foot when it was his right hand that was being held? At first, Mr. Blackwhite had been showing respect towards his opponent out of fear. Now that he found himself captive, he became worried for his life, and in a hurry used the move called Scaly Dragon Leaving the Deep Pool. Used when an arm is seized, the move involves kicking out undetected with the left foot towards the enemy's chest. The kick is extremely fierce and lethal. The enemy would usually die spitting blood if they did not succeed in avoiding it. It is impossible for someone to avoid the kick without releasing his opponent's arm quickly. In this moment of extreme distress, Mr. Blackwhite was so eager to escape that he forgot that he was separated from his enemy by a thick iron door, and used this Scaly Dragon Leaving the Deep Pool method. His kick was swift, fierce, and right on target. Only it's a pity that his foot hit the center of the iron door with a loud bang. Hearing the loud noise coming from the iron door, Ling Huchong instantly realized how the iron door had protected him from Mr. Blackwhite's extremely formidable kick. He couldn't help but laugh out loud and said, "Do kick again. If you kick as fiercely as the first time, then I might just let you go." During that time, Mr. Blackwhite became frighteningly aware that his inner energy had been flowing out in a steady stream from his right wrist's inner pass and outer pass points. This was something he was most afraid of, and he was scared out of his wits. He tried to control his panic so as to slow down the energy loss. At the same time, he couldn't help but sorrowfully plead, Old gentleman, I beg you." As soon as he spoke, his inner energy gushed out of his body in a huge wave that he had to stop talking, but his energy kept flowing out rapidly. Ling Huchong had practiced that method on the steel panel for quite some time, and at this moment his dantian could be likened to an empty bamboo or a deep valley into which Mr. Blackwhite's energy flowed in. However, Ling Huchong was not aware of this. He only sensed that Mr. Blackwhite's wrist was quivering as if in fear. His anger towards Mr. Blackwhite hasn't abated yet, and thinking to frighten Mr. Blackwhite further, he shouted out, "I taught you martial arts, and therefore you are my disciple. Yet you took unfair advantage of your illustrious teacher. Shouldn't I punish you for your crime?" Mr. Blackwhite only sensed that his inner energy is rushing out of his body quickly. With much effort, he held his breath and was temporarily able to stop the energy from flowing out. However, eventually it was unavoidable that he had to take a breath, and in between exhaling and inhaling, great amount of his inner energy rushed out of his body. By now, he had forgotten the aches from his injured toes. He only wished to free his right hand out of this square hole, even if he were to lose an arm and a leg in the process. As soon as he thought of this, he drew his sword from his waist with his free hand. With a sudden body movement, the 2 acupuncture points, inner pass and outer pass on his wrist, opened up, and from them, the inner energy from his whole body rushed out as if it was river water bursting through the dikes. It was much more difficult to stop the flow again. Mr. Blackwhite knew only that he couldn't afford to suffer for long, or all his energy will be absorbed. Gritting his teeth, he decided to chop off his own hand, and promptly did his best to extract his longsword from the waist and lifted it up. However, as soon as he exerted his strength a little, his inner energy surged forward like a wave and flowed out of his body. His ears buzzed, his whole head swam, and finally he lost consciousness. Ling Huchong had seized Mr. Blackwhite's hands only to frighten him. At most, he was only going to twist and break Mr. Blackwhite's wrist to vent his anger. He did not expect Mr. Blackwhite would get so scared out of his wits that he passed out of fright. Ling Huchong laughed out loud and released Mr. Blackwhite's wrist. As soon as he let go, Mr. Blackwhite's body collapsed to the floor, and his right hand retracted from the square hole.
Okay. So, what happened? He sucked all of this guy's energy from his body. What could have happened? Give me 5 minutes. Let's take a break. All right, I'll be right back. Hello, I'm back. That song? No, that song is from an old version of Legend of Condor Heroes. Yeah, it was very old, I believe. So, if you were confused about what was happening, Ling Huchang grabbed the guy's wrist through the hole, and for some reason, he started sucking his energy, right? And the guy was guy panicked and like kicked the door and stuff, but he couldn't get his hand out, and and he tried to cut off his hand with his sword, but as when he tried to when he took his sword out, he expended some energy, so it just all of his energy flowed into Ling Huchang, and he passed out. All right. So what happened? Why did that happen? Well, I don't think they explain it yet, but you can figure it out if you paid attention. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Ling Huchang's mind, and he hurriedly tried to seize Mr. Blackwhite's hand. Luckily, he was quick as lightning and managed to hold on to the palm. He thought, why don't I use the steel handcuffs to shackle him? That way, Mr. Hongzhong will be forced to release me. Immediately, he used his strength to pull Mr. Blackwhite's hand closer. Unexpectedly, Mr. Blackwhite's head came in also through the square hole, and Ling Huchang cried out in surprise as he managed to pull in the entire body into the prison cell. This really was a big shock for Ling Huchang beyond all his expectations. He scolded himself severely for being so stupid. The square hole is 1/3 of a meter and wide enough to put a head through. As long as the head can go through, so can the body. If Mr. Blackwhite can be pulled in, how couldn't he be able to get out? It would have been impossible for him to escape from prison previously, when his hands and legs were shackled in steel chains. However, some time ago, someone had secretly sawed through the steel chains, which enabled him to free himself from them, and now he would be able to escape. He ponders, Mr. Paint must have secretly helped me by sawing the steel chains. He might have been hoping that I would make my escape by following the old man who delivered me food daily. He must have been extremely anxious, waiting for my escape. When Ling Huchang found the steel chains were sawed through, he had been practicing the skills on the iron panel, but had not yet learned them by heart, nor had achieved a measure of success. With both his mind and body focused on practicing, he didn't feel the need to escape, and therefore did not think of running away. As he hesitated to make a decision, an idea came to him. He hurriedly removed Mr. Blackwhite's clothes and changed into them. Then he put on Mr. Blackwhite's cap and thought to himself, when I get out of here, if other people see me, they will say I am Mr. Blackwhite. Afterwards, with Mr. Blackwhite's long sword hanging by his waist, his spirits was greatly lifted. He shackled Mr. Blackwhite's hand and foot with the steel handcuffs and used his strength to pinch the rings shut together so that the rings fit so tightly that they sink into the flesh. Mr. Blackwhite groaned as he was awakened by the pain. Ling Huchang smiled and said, we, brothers, are both cunningly pulled into this place. At least now the accounts are settled, and it is your turn, old man, to be delivered food and water. Mr. Blackwhite moaned, run, old gentleman, run. You use the art of essence absorbing. Ling Huchang remembered that when he was fighting alongside Xiang Wenjian, some people from the group of opponents called out evil art of essence absorbing. Now, hearing the name again from Mr. Blackwhite, he couldn't resist but ask, what is the art of essence absorbing? Mr. Blackwhite answered, I
deserve to die. Ling Huchang withdrew from Mr. Blackwhite's side, deciding not to stay and listen to his reasons or explanations. First, he poked his head out through the square hole. Then he extended both of his arms out of the hole and, putting his palms on the iron door, pushed his whole body out through the hole into the tunnel. When he stood up after steadying himself, he became aware that there was a great amount of stored inner energy in his dantian, and it was making him quite uncomfortable. He did not realize that he had absorbed all of Mr. Blackwhite's inner energy. The narrator switched. He just thought that because he hadn't practiced martial arts for some time, the Peach Valley Six Immortals and Monk No Commandments' inner energy streams have returned to his dantian. At this time, he only wished to depart from this dark prison as soon as possible. So he picked up the oil lamp that Mr. Blackwhite had carried earlier and went out from the tunnel. He found the door at the end of the tunnel unlocked, and guessed that Mr. Blackwhite might have left it open for himself to go out again. Thus, Ling Huchang was able to escape from the prison without much effort. As he stepped over the stone gateway in the tunnel, he remembered the days he had spent in the dark prison and felt as if they had occurred in a different lifetime. Unexpectedly, in between, his resentment towards Mr. Huangjong and others had also melted away. Now, at last, he felt free, and other things do not matter to him anymore. When he got to the end of the tunnel, he climbed the last 10 steps, then put his head against the iron door and with bated breath listened attentively to sounds above. Even though he had not encountered any trap, he was being very careful and cautious. Instead of rushing up the stairs and dashing through the door, he stopped and listened for a sound from the other side. Hearing nothing even after some time, he felt certain that Mr. Huangjong must not be in the bedroom. Thus he gently lifted up the iron door and climbed up. After leaping out of the hole in the bed, he put the iron door shut, pulled the bedding in place, and treaded softly on tiptoe to get out of the room, when suddenly, from behind, he heard a person spoke with immense sorrow. "Second younger brother, what are you doing?" Startled, Ling Huchang turned around only to see Mr. Huangjong, Mr. Baldbrush, and Mr. Paint, each pointing their weapons at him while completely surrounding him. He didn't know that on top of the secret door there's a trap. When he rushed out, the trap rang a bell which informed Mr. Huangjong, Mr. Baldbrush, and Mr. Paint that the door had been opened. He was now wearing Mr. Blackwhite's mask and robe, so no one was able to recognize him. However, Ling Huchang was still frightened. I, he stuttered. "I what? I had a feeling that you were up to something. You went in the prison and asked Run Wonxing to teach you Xixing Dafa, didn't you? Huh. Did you remember what vow you pledged all those years ago?" Mr. Huangjong coldly said. Ling Huchang was confused. He didn't know whether to keep pretending as Mr. Blackwhite or to reveal himself. He was undecided for a while before he pulled out the long sword on his waist and thrust it towards Mr. Baldbrush. "Good, second brother. Is it appropriate for you to thrust that sword at me?" Mr. Baldbrush sniggered and lifted his brush at the same time. This sword thrust by Ling Huchang put everyone on their guard. However, it was just a fake, as he quickly turned around and dashed out of the room. Mr. Huangjong and the rest promptly chased after him. After running for a while, he reached the front hall of the Plum Manor. Second brother, where are you going?" Mr. Huangjong shouted. Ling Huchang didn't answer him, but kept on running. He arrived at the front courtyard, where a person stood guard in the middle of the gate. "Second master, please halt!" the guard shouted. Ling Huchang kept running towards the guard and hit him on the head. The guard flew outside and landed a few feet outside the gate. He took a look and recognized the guard as Straight Line Lightning Sword Ding Jian. He was lying down straight and stiff, his body resembling the part of his nickname, Straight Line. He could now be called Double Straight Line Lightning Sword.
He never stopped moving his feet and ran towards a small lane while Mr. Huangjong reached the gate and stopped chasing. Second brother, come back. We brothers can always talk things through, Mr. Huangjong pleaded. Ling Hucheng had picked a secluded little road and later arrived at an uninhabited valley, which is quite a few li away from the Hangzhou city wall. He has been running flat out since escaping from the Plum Manor. However, when he stopped, he didn't feel tired and was not even short of breath. On the other hand, his stamina seemed to have been even better than before he got injured. He then took off Mr. Blackwhite's mask and started walking towards the sound of running water, which turned out to be a creek. Using both hands to scoop up some water to his mouth, he suddenly saw a person's reflection on the water. That person on the water has his hair loose, his face filthy, and had a very ugly expression. Ling Hucheng was startled and then laughed dumbly as he realized it was his own reflection on the water. He'd been a prisoner for several months and had not bathed during all that time. Naturally, he would turn dirty. Oh, he must smell really bad. Suddenly, he felt his body itching all over. He quickly removed his robe, jumped into the creek, and washed every nook and cranny on his body. The dirt on my body has been building up for these past few months. There must be at least 30 jin worth of dirt on me, he thought. After he's done washing his body and drunk to his heart's content, he pulled his hair and tied it at the back of his head. Checking how he looked on the water for reflection, he found he had recovered his natural look. As he was wearing his robe, he felt that the qi between his chest and stomach didn't feel so smooth, so he sat down and meditated. After a while, he felt that the qi in his dantian had scattered through the 8 arteries. Once again, the qi in his dantian felt empty, like the hollow of a bamboo, while his body felt refreshed and his qi smooth. Sniggered? Sniggered is like snickered, like a a little laugh, a little snicker. Yeah, it's a snicker. It's a Snickers bar. He didn't realize that he had finished learning the entire generation's #1 ranked Kung Fu. Taking into consideration, I love how the narrator is telling us what's happening. He didn't realize that he had finished learning the entire generation's #1 ranked Kung Fu. Taking into consideration that the Peach Valley's 6 fairies, Monk No Commandment, and Feng Shang's 8 types of internal energies have merged in his body, along with Mr. Blackwhite's energy, and added to that his whole life worth of internal energy repaired. All of these combined into a very high internal energy. Suddenly, he jumped up, pulled out the longsword on his waist, and thrusted it at a green willow at the side of the creek. His wrists trembled, and a soft sound can be heard. The longsword was returned to its sheath. He then landed back down on his left foot. Lifting his head, he was able to see 5 leaves from the green willow slowly floating down. The long sword cleared its sheath for the second time and made an arcing slash. All 5 leaves ended up on the sword's edge. Using his left hand, he picked up one of the green willow leaf from the sword's edge. A feeling of happiness rose in his heart, but he also felt strange. Master and Master Wife can't teach me Kung Fu anymore, but I prefer everything going back to the way it was. Although the Qi branch sword technique is useless, I was happy at Huashan Mountain, spending time with apprentice sister from morning till dusk. Now I'm wandering the Jianghu world alone, like a ghost, he sourly thought to himself. He felt that his Kung Fu had never been as high as at this moment, but he also felt that he had never felt as lonely as he was right now. All his life, he'd always been lively and been fond of wine. But in the past few months, he'd been all alone, locked away in an underground prison. However, even though his body was free at the moment, he still felt lonely. Standing by himself beside the creek, the feeling of happiness gradually disappeared. The gentle wind brushed his body, and the cold moon cast his shadow on the ground, while in his heart, he felt boundless despair. That's it. How was that? Did you guys like that? So it looks like now he has superior like sword skills and also superior chi skills. And he can suck people's chi from their bodies. So how powerful is this guy now? Remember before he even had the before when he didn't have his chi, he was already powerful. Now he has both sword technique and chi techniques. He just called their kung fu useless. Yeah, he just called the Huashan kung fu useless. In a way, it is kind of useless. Huashan martial arts wasn't that good. What's up, the Nugget Knight? How's it going? All right. So now that he's like the super powerful dude, what's gonna happen? Can he basically beat up everyone? Dun, 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 dun. All right. You know what I need is some wine. All right. We have one karaoke song to do. Right. Right. Yes. 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 All right. Give me some suggestions. I'm gonna go pee and get some wine, and then I'll be back.